Amazingly well written. Its targets are very well chosen. We live in an age of grinding earnestness. Private Eye always makes me laugh.
They've got the sugar coating, which is the wit. The product is sheer poison. And the sugar coating, the wit, the satire, is no more than the thing to like to be swallowed more easily.
The two standard opposing views of Private Eye magazine, provided there by Brian Walden and Sir James Goldsmith. For 30 years now, the Eye has been having a go at the rich, the powerful and the famous, and without doubt one of the main planks of its success has been its absolute refusal to take sides, its readiness to have a go at anyone, whether you like them or whether you don't.
Welcome to the Walden interview, where yet again I'm interviewing Mrs. Margaret Thatcher. I shall be grilling her on your behalf on the key issues of the day. It's been lovely out, hasn't it, Margaret?
Yes, it has, Brian.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Next week, I shall...
No. Ask me some proper questions.
I don't think that's really necessary, Margaret. Your record speaks for itself.
Well, there have been some problems.
No, you're not going to change the subject. No way. Because I am. How are the kids?
Sally Grace and Chris Barry from one of the many floppy gramophone records glued to the magazine's cover over the years. The free record is an idea that goes back to the first edition of Mesopotamia, a forerunner of the Eye put together at Oxford University by Richard Ingrams, Paul Foote, John Wells, Andrew Osmond and Peter Usborne. So how did that small circulation, cheaply produced rag grow into the highly influential 250,000 selling cheaply produced rag that Private Eye is today? The impetus to keep the thing going after university seems to have been provided by Usborne, the most businesslike of the group, together with Willie Rushton, who was an old friend of Foote and Ingrams from Shrewsbury School. Yet another old school friend was brought in as editor, the young and extremely thrusting Christopher Booker.
We are deliberately rude to a lot of people because I think it's time that someone was rude. There seems to be such a gap nowadays between what people actually think and what people say in conversation and what is actually printed in newspapers and said on television. We are saying out in print what should be said, what a lot of people actually think, rather than what people are prepared to say in mealy-mouthed platitudes on television.
What would you like to do if you did make a great deal of money?
I'd like a sort of really modern house with glass walls and things on Lake Como in Italy, and an aeroplane to fly to and from London. There's a funny thing about our society is that real talent never gets rewarded. People when they're young, I'm not talking about myself at the moment, but one does see sort of young writers who could use a lot of money and who are very talented and doing a fabulous job of work and never getting paid enough. But you also see, on the other hand, people who've made a reputation when young, getting to the age of 40 or 50, and doing very bad work, getting sort of lousy articles in newspapers and so on, getting enormous sums for them.
Christopher Booker got to the age of 40 or 50 and bought a house with stone walls near the M4. Looking back, he recognises that the Eye was lucky to start life when it did, in the middle of the 60s satire boom.
By that time, that was October 61, of course, the satire thing was suddenly taking off in an extraordinary way, and that was the month the Establishment Club opened. And by this time, everyone was talking about Beyond the Fringe as being a satire show, whereas when it had first come on in May, that word, if you look through all the reviews of Beyond the Fringe in May, the word satire doesn't appear. It's very interesting how suddenly satire was the word of the moment.
Now, you're a very frail, old-looking person, very frail indeed, I'd say you look. Wouldn't you say that under Sir Alec Douglas, old people everywhere are enjoying a higher standard of living?
Well, on Tuesday it's rye beta with continental-style marmite.
Wonderful.
And for tea, I usually lick a few trading stamps and wash them down with a cup of warm water. Yes, life's better under the Conservatives.
See that man get the decent burial?
Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, the Beyond the Fringe stars who'd been friends of Booker's at Cambridge, contributing to an Eye campaign that saw Sir Alec Douglas Hume, as he put it, laughed out of office. But the Conservative government didn't only provide the Eye with jokes. Booker and his staff heard rumours about odd goings-on at Cliveden House involving Stephen Ward and Lord Astor, so they inserted a vague reference into a topical cartoon. Willie Rushton recounts what happened next.
I remember Stephen Ward coming around to the offices. He thought we knew everything, you see, and he came and spilt the beans entirely. It was wonderful, saying, of course you do, I can see from that that you know everything about it. I'd like to give you my side of the story, which of course nobody else got.
Private Eye had discovered the Profumo affair. It's possible this first journalistic scoop might not have been followed up on what was basically, after all, a humour magazine. But in June 1963, the more journalistic-minded Richard Ingrams ousted Booker in a palace coup. Barry Fantoni, one of the Eye's great unsung heroes who joined the magazine early on and has toiled away in the background ever since, remembers the friction between the two men.
Booker would always be there till midnight and had a very volatile temperament. And on the other hand, Richard was very phlegmatic always. Did want to catch the 5:30 back to the country and did recognise, I think, that in order for the magazine to succeed long term, it needed the degree of stability that he would bring it by his own lifestyle. I quite liked working for Booker as editor in those days because it was very, very spontaneous and there was something very maniacal about his behaviour. It was great when it was going well, but I suspect during his off days or his bad days it wasn't so good. And he did get married, he did go away, and while he was away Richard sent around Robin asking everybody to sign it. I actually thought it was a birthday card. I was terrifically ignorant in those days, and I thought how very sweet, asking me to sign his birthday card or his marriage card or something. No one told me what a round Robin was, and I had finally discovered that I had actually been an instrument, as indeed everybody else was, in his being purged.
I think Willie and I both felt that he was not, although he's a very, very funny man, very good at doing jokes and everything, he was never one of nature's editors. He always found it very difficult to finish anything, which is hopeless. So everybody would be left hanging on his typewriter late at night, and it drove us all mad.
It was Willie Rushton that signed the letter, but as he'd never actually seen the word obdurate before, let alone used it, it's unlikely that he actually was the author. Unfortunately for Richard Ingrams, no sooner had he achieved his aim than the satire boom went bust.
The public's perception of satire changed a lot and people became less interested in satire, and I think the record speaks for itself. I mean, in 1965, I think we were down to about 15,000. We really had sunk. But that probably would have happened whether Ingrams or Booker were there. I don't think I'm being unfair now to say that if it wasn't for Peter Cook arriving from America and introducing the Seductive Brethren and Barry Mackenzie and all the brilliant ideas that Cook had at the time, that we would have gone under.
Spiggy Topes, the leader of the Turds, was another Cook invention, inspired, I think, by probably the Beatles. And we had a woman called Maureen Cleavage, and her article started off something like, "I want you to meet 4 very young and very exciting turds."
All of us turds have just returned from Nepal, where we were sitting and being amongst the Thackers and the Swamis in our transcendental mastication. They got this great new thing over there, what's all the rage. After the beings and the lovings, they have the famine. They just lie about all day contemplating their ever-diminishing navels. And then they give you this word, this mattress, what you have to repeat to yourself endlessly, and you go into this trance. And then all the holy men and the gurus sneak up on you and rob you blind. And doing all this taught me something about myself what I never knew before, that I am a completely stupid twit.
Cook bought the magazine from Peter Usborne, appealed successfully for donations from the likes of Peter Sellers, Jane Asher and Dirk Bogarde, and even edited an issue of the Eye himself. In it he boldly named the Cray brothers as the gangsters who were terrorising half of East London, then jetted off to Tenerife before publication day, leaving Richard Ingram's kneecaps in the firing line. Cook also introduced an up-and-coming Australian humorist, Barry Humphries, whose early messages from Melbourne now have a rather familiar ring.
It is now approximately in the vicinity of 99 degrees in the shade of our dining room, and we're celebrating Christmas in the distinctive Australian way or style. Our festive board is literally groaning with boiling hot Yuletide comestibles, and the wife Beryl has just plunged her electric mulling poker into my delicious glass of beer. The temperature in our dining room is now approximately in the vicinity of 130 degrees, and we're all huddling round the blazing Yuletide log with nothing on, sipping our scalding emu punch and telling the odd, the spine-chilling ghost story.
But if it was Cook who came up with many of the characters, it was Ingrams who collected them into a Beachcomber-esque family that came back week after week. And it was largely Ingrams who created the Eye's own vocabulary that gives readers the impression of being on the inside looking out. Phrases like tired and emotional and Ugandan discussions.
The expression talking about Uganda, I think, arose as a result of the poet James Fenton coming to the private eye lunch, and he told a long story about how he'd been at a party, and he'd been chatting to a lady journalist present, who had said to him very excitedly, James, you must come upstairs. They're talking about Uganda." And then after a bit he did go upstairs, and he went into this room, and he discovered the lady journalist in flagrante with a wooden-legged black man, who I think was the former head of the Ugandan Electricity Board. George Brown helped to create the expression tired and emotional, which was another eye euphemism for someone who'd had too much to drink, because he was permanently in a state of intoxication. And when he became the Foreign Secretary, this was obviously a cause for much comment.